The meeting is being broadcast live, and a recording of the meeting will be made available as soon as possible after this meeting has concluded. We welcome the use of the Welsh language at our meetings, but I've had no request for people to speak Welsh today, and therefore the meeting will be conducted in English only. Please can members refrain from using the chat function and instead use the raise hand icon to indicate when you want to speak. May I remind you that as statutory guidance made under Section 4 of the Local Government Wales Measure 2011 and our formally adopted hybrid meeting policy, any member attending the meeting remotely must be able to be seen and heard by members and officers who attend in the meeting, as well as by members of the public viewing the meeting. So can I ask you all that you please use your cameras for the duration of this meeting. Please also remember to keep your microphones muted when you're not talking. And please do not interrupt discussions until you've notified of your intention to speak and have been invited to do so. We'll now move on to our agenda. Agenda 1. Jade, do we have any apologies, please?
Thanks, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Seaborn this morning.
Okay. I'd like to make a note that Councillor Seaborn is absent due to a bereavement, and I'm sure as a committee we wish to extend our sympathy to Rose and the family. Okay. Any declarations of interest, please? No? Okay. Move on to item 3, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of the 10th, 2024. Do you have any questions to raise in relation to the minutes? If not, I will take them as read. Everybody okay? Thank you. Our next item is agenda item 4, which is our action sheet. Members, there are no actions outstanding on the action sheet, so we'll move straight on, if you're all happy, to agenda item 6. This morning's meeting is the Youth Offending Service. And before we commence our discussions, I'd like to rate Councillor Peter Jones, the Executive Member for Corporate Governance and Resource, Jason O'Brien, Strategic Director of Children's Family and Education, Chesney Chick, Service Manager for Monmouth and Torvine, and welcome to all officers either online or in person from the Youth Offending Service. Okay. Jones, would you like to come in before we start our questioning? Because we've all read the report. So would you like to come in and make any comments, please?
You're on mute, Councillor Jones. Sorry, Chair, did you ask me to come in then?
Yes.
Yeah, I've got no opening remarks, Chair. I'll wait for the officers to present the report and I'll come in as necessary.
Okay, thank you. Jason. Anything to come in before?
Thank you, Chair. No, just obviously I'm aware that members will have been through the report in some detail today, and it's quite an in-depth report that Chesney's presented. So I think we'll just open it up for any comments and questions. I would point out the two officers on line as well, Adam Nash and Tracy Davis, who were operational managers at the Youth Offending Service.
Nothing to add further to that.
Well, if you're happy, we'll answer our question. I've got the first question. It's relating to paragraph 3.2. All members of the service are trained in trauma practice. Can you set out in some more detail, please, on what trauma-informed practice is?
I think possibly I would come to Tracy, if that's okay with Tracy, given that she's the kind of point of contact for the service with regards to trauma informed.
Tracy, would you like to come in, please?
Yes, of course, no problem at all. So trauma-informed practice is the advocated way of working with children and young people, and is advocated by the Youth Justice Board for Wales and England. In Wales, we've been quite ahead of the game, so we've been using trauma-informed practice across the whole of Wales for quite some time, but it's now an approach that's used in England as well. And as I said, it's advocated by research, practice, the Youth Justice Board. So it's taken into account that the children that we work with in the Youth Offending Services, obviously we work with a range of children from prevention through to statutory, but a lot of the children we work with will have had difficult life experiences previous, lots of ACEs. I don't know if you've heard the term ACEs, was adverse childhood experiences, lots of issues in respect of maybe attachment theory, psychological theory. So the children that we work with in the Youth Offending Service would, on average, would have had a higher number of really difficult childhood experiences, which could be parental abuse, neglect, substance misuse, family mental health problems, living in deprivation and poverty, and maybe parents within the criminal justice system. So the trauma-informed practice is an approach that we use with children and young people, and we're all fully trained by the Gwent Attachment Service and by CAMS. And it's basically a method of engaging with those children that are the most really difficult to reach children, the hardest to engage. So it's psychologically informed. So we have things to scaffold around that. So all our staff are fully trained in it, and it's an approach that we use from every level of our service. It's about sort of certain approaches, techniques. So it's about consistency, predictability, recognising their trauma. It's about really comprehensive engagement strategies, because obviously a lot of the children that we work with, if you look at sort of Maslow's hierarchy of need, which is basically where children are, so they might be sort of at the basic level and how far they the triangle. So if you've got a child who hasn't even got their basic needs met, that they're not in a safe home environment, they're not sort of accessing things that other children would in respect of love and care and sort of, good home conditions, you can't expect them to understand things at the further end, to be doing work with them around their behaviour and consequences and understanding that when their basic needs aren't even met, so they're not even in a position to sort of receive that intervention and support. And because children that have lived through lots of really difficult life experiences, their brain will have developed differently, so their attachment will have affected their brain development. So some of our children, their brain will have developed differently. They're not able to sort of communicate in ways that other children that haven't had those life experiences would. Often they'll be in like a trauma brain, they call it, so they'll be very responsive, very reactive, because they're used to their previous experience of abuse or neglect is triggering something within them. So it's basically a psychologically informed model of working with children and young people, understanding their difficult life experiences, understanding the brain development, triggers, emotional responses, and trying to work with them to build that level of safety, security, so that they're in a position to receive intervention, to look at their behaviour, to look at how it's impacting themselves, how it's impacting others, and how it's impacting the community. So to support that, we have a YOS, we have support from the Gwent Attachment team, we have a YOS, CAMS clinical nurse specialist. We have access to the enhanced case management model. So we can refer to the psychologist from the Gwent Attachment team, and they will support a case formulation meetings, which we would have with multi-agency. So we'd invite all the professionals that are working with that child, and then we would have a case formulation meeting, which would look at right back for the child, pre-birth experiences, family, child, very young childhood experience, right through to the current time, to look at what are the presenting issues, what are the things with what's leading to that behaviour, what's their view of the world, what's their experiences. Maybe some of our children might be 15, 16, but developmentally they're very much, at a younger level. So we do a case formulation where we map out developmentally their sort of what's happened in their life to date, and look at responses, methods, approaches that we can take with them, and we share with a multi-agency group, and that helps us to sort of understand with this child, okay, for this child we know we're going to have to go in very slowly, we're going to have to use these types of engagement activities. This is the underlying cause, but we need to address, the home environment, the school education environment, these things alongside it for them to be in a position to receive that support. And there's also an enhanced case manager. We can refer into the FACS, a forensic adolescent team, and that covers the whole of Wales. And that's for children that need that very, very high level of case management input. So again, that would start with formulation, but then you'd have the psychologist, psychiatrist, leading. They don't provide that direct work to the children themselves, but supporting youth offending service staff. So clinical supervision almost, in terms of, have you tried this? What's this presenting? What this could mean? How we can make sense of this with the child to help, to help them to make sense of their life experience. And we've found that actually some of our most, traumatised children that have had really, really high levels of offending, we've been able to make good relationships with the off staff and make some really quite positive changes by using that consistent trauma-informed approach to them, to help them make the best of, the support. Because sometimes children are so, within their trauma, they can't receive the help that's being offered to them. That, you know, so it's about that engagement and trying to find all the methods and approaches that will best help that, because ultimately, if you're able to work on that with a child, that will be the most significant factor in terms of protecting the community, protecting victims, reducing further offences. That will make a huge significant factor in terms of likelihood of future offending behaviours. So it's protecting the child, but also protecting communities and reducing reoffending as well.
Thank you ever so much. Does anyone want to come in? Anything? Thanks, Tracy, for that really in depth.
Chesney.
Just to add to that, in using those approaches, I think the also added value that the kind of staff are kind of anecdotally coming back with is that they are finding it much easier or better to engage with the children that we support. But not only are being able to share that assessment and insight to some of the presentations of the children is helping the parents or primary carers then help manage and understand some of those presentations, which in the past may have been a barrier for them kind of maintaining that placement, that home placement. So that's also an added value that helps share, it was worth sharing with members.
Just to add, I don't think I could have wanted for a more comprehensive answer. But just to add in terms of the work, the training that Tracy mentioned there with the Gwent Attachment Service, that training is undertaken within staff within children's social care as well within the local authorities. So there's a synergy of approach between those children who have a service from the Youth Offending Service, who are also in receipt of a service within within our local authority children's services.
Okay, we'll now move on to question 2, and I can ask Councillor Lucy Williams to take this, as Councillor Watkins hasn't arrived yet.
I think you've pretty much answered it. It's actually a question around the training, just to kind of get a bit of an understanding about, so that there is a consistency of approach. How often is it compulsory, and how often is the training rolled out?
So first and foremost, it's compulsory. I would like to say that there's a programme that is rolled out every so often, but I think that they're still on that tranche of kind of training. Right. Now, that's not just purely kind of our youth offending service, that's other youth offending services throughout Gwent and other agencies and partnerships. So children's services have also would have received that training. So I think they're rolling that out, and I think there's been some barriers to completing that with pregnancy and staff kind of missing. So I think it may be on hold. However, in saying that, what we find is that we've, as already mentioned by Tracy, that we have a CPN with us who will kind of undertake training on one-to-one, which will kind of update staff. We constantly keep it on the agenda in kind of service meetings, but also if staff are kind of coming back via their supervision that there's some shortfalls or they needed kind of revisiting, we'll then go to the CAM service and say, can you kind of provide us with training on specific areas within the trauma-informed, and then we'll do that then with either a cohort of staff specifically requiring that or the full service. And go back to the initial question, yeah, it was compulsory, so everybody through to kind of the social worker to the business support would have undertaken the training. I don't know whether Tracy you want to add anything to that.
I think Adam's got his hand up, Chez. I think Adam might want to come in this point.
Yeah, just to say that we've actually got 2 members of staff at the moment who missed the original tranche of training that participate in the training being delivered by the Gwent Attachment Service. So because they're rolling the training out to our partners within MCC and TOR, because we obviously cover both local authorities, they're able to access the training through that. So it's an ongoing process. I think it's about 9 sort of blocks of training, and they need to attend at least 7 of those to be sort of accredited. So it's an accredited program. So as part of the training, there's the sort of the theoretical formulation work that goes on, but also like skills practice. So it's equipping our members of staff then to have the skills to work with those hard to reach children that Tracy has so sort of eloquently described earlier. And the feedback that we're getting from staff, and they are able to use those in practice. So the sort of during our supervision sessions with staff and during case discussions and sort of team meetings, the response that we've had is really positive.
Jason,
just to add there, in terms of that ongoing training, the Gwent Attachment Service, they carry a schedule of training within Torvine for all our Torvine children's services staff. Obviously, there's natural move on, so that when people move on and new people start, invariably there are going to be some who aren't as up to date with training. What we've just completed, though, which Adam has referenced there in terms of some of the join-up, we've just completed another cohort of training within Torfaen, which is our second whole schedule of training, and we're just about to enter on the cohort 2 as well. So there's that constant, and even for staff who've already been trained in it, there's that constant feed and a constant renewal of training.
You happy? Anyone want to come in? Okay. Well, we move on to question 3, which is related to paragraph 3.3. Monitoring Torfaen's YOSS prevention programmes are developed to provide a multi-agency response to children aged 8 to 17. While you state that 8 to 17, measures and performance data are set out later in the report for those aged 10 plus. Is that because we haven't had any children as young as 8 through our services? And if so, what's the rationale for setting the age at 8?
Again, I'll probably come to one of the ops managers. I know Adam's come on, but it's criminal responsibility primarily is kind of set, I believe, at 10, but Adam will go into greater detail with regards to where we are.
Adam, do you want to come in and answer, please?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so the age of responsibility is 10. So whether it's, I think it might well be a typo within the report. So generally speaking, we would work with children from the age of 10 onwards. We have accepted children younger than 10. But generally speaking, that's we've had lots of primary school children refer to our service for preventative support. They're on the cusp of turning 10 within 2 or 3 months, and we've worked with those children. But it's set at 10 because of the criminal age of responsibility. And generally speaking, what we're finding is lots and lots of behaviours that are referred for younger children probably come under the safeguarding remit. So as part of our screening process, so there's a comprehensive referral form that we've developed for our partner agencies to refer into our service. So within that document is the behaviours, concerns, what's worked previously, lots and lots of information they're provided, and that allows us then to screen that referral. And if we don't feel that it sits within our criteria, we can signpost to other services such as space wellbeing or PCAMs or whatever services we feel might meet that child's need. But generally speaking, we would work with 10-year-olds as opposed to 8-year-olds. So I think it might well be a typo within the report, I'm afraid.
Thanks very much. Anyone else want to come in? Anybody else? Councillor Thomas's question is question 4, please.
Thank you, Chair. This question is 3.3 of the report. In order to ensure that those children and families most at risk receive the help and support they need, the following criteria has been applied. The behaviour of the child is of concern to agencies and or their partners/carers. How can the Youth Offending Service make services accessible and visible to those who need them most?
I think first and foremost through our partnership agencies and ensuring they're fully aware of the raft of support and preventative programme that we have available to us. We're in constant communication with such agencies, children's services being one of a number, safer communities, and ensuring that they are kept up to date with the preventative programme that we have available to us. There's also the panels. I can't recall the name for Torfaen's panel, but we have a seat around that panel, and should a case come in that fits the criteria, then we will offer our services and take receipt of any referrals.
Jason, do you want to come in?
As I understand, as well, there's also a self-referral process for some elements of it as well. Obviously, I think what the panel and the referral process and the determination of eligibility is helpful, because I guess what we don't want to do as well is have children and young people and families inappropriately entering the service. So it's appropriate there's a good gatekeeping mechanism through that paneling process as well. So it's not just an individual decision. There's a multi-agency decision very often made around the need for a service and ensuring that the YOS is the right service, or it could be another service that could provide the right level of service for that individual.
Adam, do you want to come in, please?
Yeah, just to say, I think the proof's in the pudding, essentially. I think because what we are finding is we are receiving referrals from a real sort of breadth of 8 different agencies. So lots and lots, obviously, as you would expect, lots of schools, both primary school and secondary schools within both local authorities. Pleasingly, we're also getting lots of referrals from the police. So within the Youth Offending Service, we're quite lucky in that we've got a seconded police officer within our service, and as part of her role is not only to sort of process referrals and complete that direct work we needed with children, but she also does lots of training with sort of new staff and existing staff within Gwent Police, and as part of that process, it's about promoting the prevention referral. So just as anecdotally, really, we received a referral for 3 10-year-old children from the Blaenavon area fairly recently from a police officer who attended a call, didn't feel that it was right that those children, due to their ages and the circumstances, and the potential impact it could have on their future, didn't feel that it was necessary to sort of prosecute those children. But he put a prevention referral in for us, which we've accepted. So I think that shows that the message is getting out there. Also, myself and Tracy, we attend sort of service meetings for other agencies just to actively promote that service. But I think, yeah, we do receive the referrals from a wide range of sources, which I think is really pleasing. And just as an addition, we made some changes to how we are processing and screening those referrals fairly recently. What we felt, the previous system, we met on a monthly basis and had a panel to screen those referrals. But what we were finding was very often there was a delay in processing them, and then those children being able to access support. So we sort of streamlined it now, and the referrals, and as part of that process, we redesigned our prevention referral form so that it captured more information. So lots of the answers that were being discussed in the previous panels were there within the form. And that just allowed, it's a bit of it expedited the service for children and families within Torfaen and Monmouthshire.
Thanks, Adam. Does anyone else want to come in? Yeah. Okay. So next question, and I'll ask Lucy if you will take it. It's question 5, please.
So this is about the voluntary nature of preventative services. So are there consequences to not engaging on a voluntary basis? And how proactive are we in encouraging people to work with our services?
Tracy, do you want to come in, please?
Yeah, of course. So in terms of the prevention service within YOS is a purely voluntary service. That being said, so as Adam's already referenced, we have a wide range of professionals referring through to us. They do have to agree to it because it is preventative. They do have to agree to it. But that being said, we wouldn't just say we'd offer one visit or they're not engaging. We would use all of our trauma-informed practice engagement activities as we would for a prevention referral, as we would any other referral in YOS. So whilst it is a prevention for the children and young people, and there's not a consequence for them as such if they don't engage with it, the only consequence may be things like, I don't know, if they're on multi-agency plans within children's services and things like that, and child protection, it may be that it looks, you know, if they engage on a voluntary basis with other agencies, obviously that will also help in terms of addressing all of the issues and needs within the family. So there wouldn't be a consequence as such, but for the families, they may see the benefit in terms of we're demonstrating that we're working with YOS and other agencies and addressing some of the difficulties that we have. So there's not a consequence for them if they don't engage with it. However, we even with our children that come through under prevention, we make every attempt to engage with them. We do multiple visits to the home. We contact the other professionals involved. If we're finding that they're not keeping appointments with us, we go back to the original referrer to encourage, you know, perhaps they can do a joint visit with us. With other agents, we'll go into schools, meet with children in schools, at home. So we'll do everything we can to engage those children at that level, because often we have children that come through via prevention and they might then come through for other things. So we really try and give, you know, to go all out to engage children at that early intervention, because first of all, it could prevent them coming any further into the system, or it could reduce the, you know, the effect, you know, the problematic behaviour that could lead to offending. But yeah, we would try really hard to engage them on a voluntary basis, using all our multi-agency services within the YOS, because obviously in the YOS we've got parenting support, we've got access to substance misuse specialists, mental CAMS, mental health worker, and an education specialist. So we've got a lot of victim work, so we've got a lot of specialisms within the YOS. So we would use all of our resources, whether it would be a prevention case or any other case that we work with, even if it was to come through from the court or statutory.
Thanks, Tracy. I'm going to ask Adam to come in now, please.
Yeah, just to echo what Tracy's covered, really, we use a full sort of remit of skills that we've developed during the sort of trauma-informed and other skills that staff bring into the service. But also, I think it's important to recognise that it isn't just preventative work through the prevention route, if that makes sense. We also work with children on acceptable behaviour contracts. I know that this scrutiny panel is around our response to sort of antisocial behaviour within the community, which is obviously a really prevalent issue for the communities of Torfaen. So those children that have been identified as engaging in antisocial behaviour, the process is strike one, strike two letters by the community safety partners, and then it sort of escalates. As part of that escalation process, is those children invited in for a meeting where an acceptable behaviour contract is agreed, and they usually last for 6 months. And within that contract, they can be, again, this is a voluntary arrangement between the child and the sort of community safety partnership, but we have a role in that, because as part of the contract that they agree, they could be not to engage in, obviously, antisocial behaviour, not to engage with particular children if they are causing sort of issues as a collective. There can be like geographical restrictions as part of those, but a key aspect is then engagement with us. Again, that is mandatory. That is something that they agree to, and I know it's referenced later on in the report. We do have good success with those children. So what I can do as part of our, it's a bit of a bargaining tool, isn't it? If they engage with us, they are unlikely to escalate through that ASB process, because they could end up with antisocial behaviour injunctions, which have significant implications for that child and the family. So that's a prevention sort of intervention with us, but there is some teeth in it.
Thanks, Adam. Anybody else want to come in?
Just to add, Chair, I think it's well worth mentioning is that they're a well-established, long-established kind of staff group that are extremely experienced engaging children. They kind of, they use the trauma-informed that we touched upon earlier on, but not only that, they kind of ethos in the service is not to criminalise children, is kind of part of them almost, so they do everything they possibly can to engage those children in the service.
Thanks. Can the next question, please?
The two parts of that is kind of how it's kind of utilised, and I suppose, do we have good response from it? I think if I could take the second, and I'm sure kind of Adam and Tracy may want to kind of come in at a later date, but certainly the responses that we have back are very often extremely positive, which is brilliant, but and that's always fed back to the kind of the service at the appropriate times, and also shared with kind of members of the local management board. Similarly, if we have negative feedback, that's also used, and kind of the discussion then is how we could then improve service and what that would look like, and the kind of impact on service delivery and so on and so forth. I think the delivery of it, it's a bit clunky. We've looked at improving that over a number of years, certainly since I've been part of the service, and it's been due to a number of reasons, because of the kind of technology available to us, how that technology works in certain parts of the kind of the authority in which we're at. It may work well in Pontypool, but not so well in Blenheim, and so on and so forth. So that's something that we're constantly looking at, and looking at how to improve. I would like to say that we kind of cracked that nut, but unfortunately that's not the case. So going back to it, yes, the feedback is really positive, and we use that and kind of so on and so forth. but we're not in a place where, you know, we have 100% kind of feedback. I would like to say we're at 60% or somewhere around there, but sometimes we may dip below that kind of level. So that's something we're continually looking at and working on with the staff and partnership agencies.
Obviously, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's an annual youth justice report as well, which I'm anticipating that the information from Viewpoint is incorporated within that annual youth justice report and annual youth justice plan. Obviously, that user feedback incorporated within that.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Tracy, Adam, do you want to come in?
Yes, we also use, so as well as the Viewpoint which we've talked about, which we have had a few technological issues and we've gone through various methods in developing that, we also use self-assessment. So when we do an assessment with a child, with every child that we work with in the OS, we'll do a full assessment with, and within that assessment there's self-assessment sections which are similar feedback to, you know, and we do them at review and end point as well as the initial. So that self-assessment will talk about what they think are the difficulties in their life or the good things, but it also talk about in review and end point about the service they received, their member of staff, their appointments, what was helpful, what wasn't helpful. So even when we've had difficulties with Viewpoint at times, we do also have that data which we can use aggregate to look at our overall feedback. And we do sort of separate feedback with like victims of offences, and we get very good feedback from victims and parents because we provide we're interested in the parents' feedback, whether they've been open to us for parenting support or not, on their experience of their child receiving a service from the Youth Offending Service. But for those parents that receive family support from us, we've got really good parenting workers that are really good at engaging with some of our parents and providing that holistic approach with the parent and the child. And we've got very good feedback mechanisms with parents as well. So it is, as Ches mentioned, it's something that we're working on. But we have more than one method, I suppose. We also do, like when we do review meetings and children's compliance panels, referral order panels, we have evaluations as part of that and things via court. So our court officers, there's certain things that they would, you know, sort of act that child and parents' experience of attending a court and if the YOS have been helpful in terms of the information they've provided. So we do have quite a wide range of feedback. There's always room for improvement. And then we want it to be a holistic, so we're getting the feedback and that's feeding back directly into how we make changes in our service. We've done that with, at times like during COVID, we did an instance like a survey monkey. So we do evaluations outside of that to get straight out to families to see what were they struggling with during COVID. Was there anything that we could be providing that we weren't? What additional types of support we could provide? And we got some quite good responses with that as well. So I think we keep trying within, there's always room for improvement, but we do have quite a wide range of feedback mechanisms that let us know really that we're on the right tracks or things that maybe we need to consider to look at in terms of future service development.
Thanks, Tracy. Anything else? We'll go on to question 7, which is related to 3.12 of the report. An ABC usually lasts for 6 months. What happens after 6 months? Can the ABC be extended? Is the case reviewed to see why it has not been effective? Adam?
Yeah, I'll come in here if I can. Yeah, so ABCs usually do last for 6 months, and during that 6 month period, we're in regular consultation with our community safety partners, sort of Helena McDade, Kelly Williams, Karen Mayo, and the others in the team. So, and that's a regular dialogue. So it's this case manager touching base with them, making sure that, you know, asking questions. Are there additional ASB concerns? Any reports? And that's a two-way process. They can be extended. Fairly recently, this is a perfect example of some of the work that we do with children. There was a child referred to us attending an education provision within Monmouthshire, but was a resident of Torvine. The issues were in the Torvine area. So he was allocated to one of our workers. He signed up ABC, worked well, but there were still some concerns. So the ABC was extended for a further 3 months. So he worked with us for a 9-month period. And during that time, his behaviour improved, I should say, within the community, but also within school. They found that his attendance was better, his sort of response to teachers, where in the past he might have sort of flew off the handle and things. much better response to some of the rules and boundaries within the education provision. Attendance also improved, application improved. Unfortunately, we're victim of our own success to a certain extent, because there was no further instance of ASB or criminal behaviour within the local community. So the support worker that worked with this child had a call from the child's teacher and asked could he put a prevention referral in because his behaviour in school had deteriorated. So as part of our screening process, we liaised with our colleagues within the Community Safety Partnership and within the police, and there'd been no concerns of ASB or criminality within the community. So unfortunately, we couldn't work with that child because it was about behaviour within education. So, you know, what we do does work with the majority of children that do attend ABCs, but there's a review process built into all our interventions. So every 3 months, we get together with the child, the parent, and any sort of important others. So school can be part of that process, or the child's social worker, for example. And it's about reviewing the work that's going on. So it's about what's working well. As Tracy mentioned earlier, it's about getting that feedback. Anything we need to change. What are we doing well? What can we do better? And that helps then improve that child's plan, because the work with children isn't, you know, it's not a linear process. There are ups and downs, and we need to amend our plans accordingly for those children. So yeah, those ABCs are reviewed. In a long-winded way, I answered the question.
Adam, I've got a supplementary. How long does an ABC stay on record, and does it have any lasting detriment to a young person when they're applying for a position, a job, or for an apprenticeship or anything?
No, it doesn't. It's not on the child's record because it's an informal arrangement it's a voluntary arrangement between the child and the local authority. So we wouldn't be on any child's records. It would have it's not a barrier to further education or for work.
Appreciated. Anybody else? Okay. Can we move on now to question 8 from Councillor Lucy Williams, please?
Thank you. So this is a question in relation to the turnaround project, 3.14. We noticed that the criteria is quite strict, and that it sort of challenging that criteria hasn't happened since its inception. Have there been further discussions about the criteria, and if not, why not?
There's been a number of discussions around it, and every opportunity that certainly managers throughout Wales, when they've had the opportunity, they've asked the question as to why it's so restrictive, and that, you know, I think it was phrased as that it was kind of low-hanging fruit. I think the phrase was used by somebody, is that it's only using those children who possibly won't benefit as much as those with those more complex needs. And the response have always been is that they believe, which is the Ministry of Justice, is that those children with those most complex needs would be in receipt of support from statutory services such as children's services, because they'd be on the Child Protection Register, or they'd be children looked after, or on some other order within those services. So therefore, that we could they didn't meet the criteria, and that hasn't changed. As I said, it's been challenged on a number of occasions, but certainly we've always been met with that response.
Right. Are practitioners happy about that?
I think, given that it's always been on the agenda, every time we've had the opportunity, we suggest not, and they feel that it's kind of failing some children. What I would say on a more positive note is that it's allowed Monmouthshire and Torfaen and other services throughout Gwent to kind of start working with children who wouldn't necessarily be, who wouldn't have come across our kind of threshold in the past. And so that's been a real positive for us, and we've seen a real increase in those numbers. Certainly the feedback that we've had from those families and children that we've supported through the turnaround has been extremely positive also. You know, some of the feedback is that they don't know what they would have done if we hadn't become involved. So, you know.
Okay. Adam, do you want to come in, please?
Yeah, just to say, I think the intentions of the MOJ were really good in when they rolled out turnaround, but I think what they didn't consider was the fact that within Wales there was an embedded prevention agenda, and as part of the Welsh Government blueprint for youth justice services within Wales. So lots of our colleagues within England don't necessarily have a prevention service, which we do. So I think from the MOJ's perspective, what they felt were those children that were on the child protection register or child looked after or care experience, they should be receiving that support from those agencies, and they shouldn't come to the youth offenders. So I think that's why they had that set criteria. And I do agree with Chairs. We challenged it from the outset, and there's been regular meetings with the guys from the turnaround scheme from MOJ. And yeah, they weren't budging on it, I'm afraid. But just to read what Chairs have said, really, we've had some really good success with those children that we've worked with. Because lots of children that we've sort of picked up as part of our turnaround provision, they were on release under investigation for sort of serious offences. So we've worked with some children we've worked with on over an 8, 9, 10-month period. And what we've been able to do is inform the Crown Prosecution Service and the officer in the case of the work that we've completed with that child, and that's helped them make that decision then to possibly give the child a lesser sanction than they might have because the work has already been completed. So it's had some real tangible outcomes, not only the sort of softer stuff that we're getting back from feedback from the children and the families during our review processes and just during general discussions. We've had some really good results with turnaround, and unfortunately their funding is it's ending in March. It's the usual story, isn't it? You have a fantastic idea, there's this pot of money, do some brilliant work, but now you've got to do that brilliant work without that pot of money, which is extremely unfortunate, but that's the world we live in, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Anybody else want to come in? Luke, your question 9 has been more or less answered. Do you want to bring anything up before we move on to question 10? Okay, do you move on to question 10, please?
Yeah, sorry, I've got a raft of questions, I'm sorry. That relates to 3.23, which is looking at harmful sexual behaviour. And again, I think you've partly answered it, but it's just about understanding, because obviously this is a particular challenging area. Is there particular training about that? Are there practitioners who specialise in that kind of thing? Just kind of to unpack that area of intervention a bit.
I'm more than happy to kind of answer. Initially, yes, the whole service recently went through what we refer to as AIM3 training. But I know Tracy has her hand up and she would be far better kind of positioned to kind of give an in-depth answer in response to that.
Tracy, do you come in, please, and give us your answer?
Yes, of course. Yeah, thank you. So, yes, all our staff, well, I say all our staff, all our case managers, so our social workers, senior prac support workers, and some of our specialists also, are fully trained in interventions for and assessments for sexually harmful behaviour for children and young people. So we've got our staff trained up in the AIM3 intervention. So it's an assessment process, which is like a prescribed, really comprehensive assessment process and interventions that lead on from the full assessment process. So our staff are fully trained in that. We've also had training for our staff for technology assisted, because that's something that we see quite a lot of in the youth offending service and other youth offending services, is that sometimes the sexually harmful behaviour with children and young people can be online activity. So our staff are trained in the technology assisted harmful sexual behaviour, because there's some differences in terms of the assessments and the interventions you'd undertake. We've recently done training in the last month or so for our staff as well for the AIM training, but undertaking assessments for under 12, so for the younger age range of children, which was really useful, really good training, because a lot of the children as we've said, we're getting children through a lot younger for lots of, referrals from schools, things like that, and sometimes, those prevention referrals are linked to concerns around harmful sexual behaviour. So for those younger end children, now our staff are fully trained in the assessments, because there are differences in the assessment, because things which would form as natural part of developmental, sort of cycles and things. So when you're assessing risk, you've got to really be aware of that. So the AIM under 12, 12, and also some of our children that might be developmentally older, but they function at a much lower age, we've got that intervention, we can use them. In addition to that, as managers have also had the training for AIM training in terms of supervisory skills, supervising other staff. So I think in terms of our harmful sexual behaviour, we're lucky we're in a position where we've had all the relevant training and all the specialisms of that training. So we also sit in, so within sort of the panels and everything that take place in children's services, the harmful sexual behaviour strategy discussions, exploitation meetings, you know, strategy meetings, myself and Adam usually cover most of those between us, or if not, a case manager, if they, one of our social workers or senior practice, if they're already involved. And then we feed into those initial strategy discussions around the harmful sexual behaviour, you know, risks, things that need to be put in place, whether there needs to be a full aim assessment, what intervention the YOS could provide, at what stage would they be able to provide it, and all those sorts of things. So, yeah, it is something that we have got a specialism within YOS, and that we are fully trained in.
Adam, do you want to come in, please?
Yeah, just in addition, really, to Tracy's thorough answer, as part of the training, there's a test at the end. It's like being back in school.
Yeah.
And if you don't score highly enough, you aren't able to practice AIM 3 interventions or the assessment process. So it's a vigorous and quite a robust, really, training programme. It is renowned all through the UK. I think they expanding, it was mentioned in the training, it might have been a bit of a sales pitch, sort of New Zealand, Australia, Finland, so lots of other countries are adopting that model. So it's a recognised model of assessment and intervention with children. And I think what it also allows us to do is, like myself and Tracy, when we sit on some of those harmful sexual behaviour meetings, is to relieve people's anxieties a little bit as well, because, you know, it's a really emotive subject for people and professionals to discuss. So it just helps us help them sort of hold and manage the risks, and that can be our partners then within sort of, particularly within education, because obviously, you know, they're managing 500, 600, 700 children within education provisions. And there's a lot of fear with children that may have allegations of committing harmful sexual behaviour about how they can sort of safely allow that child back into the school, how they monitor and supervise those children. So I think there's added value, really, not just in terms of if children are referred in to us, but some of the expertise that we can offer within that risk management planning.
Lucy, you okay? Yeah. Anybody else? Okay. Thanks both Tracy and Adam. We go on now to our next question, which again comes from Councillor Lucy Williams, and it's question 11.
I'm just scrolling down. I got allocated a lot of questions. So this now is moving on to stat 3.33. It's a simple question, really, in relation to going to accommodation. So have we got any instances where a child's had to be accommodated to this accommodation, and where is the nearest youth detention accommodation? Do we have to send children out of county?
I certainly kind of attempted, and hope that Adam and kind of Tracy will kind of chip in. We've not been in that situation kind of for some time. I can't remember actually the last time that we were in that position, but I do know from kind of working closely with colleagues from Caerphilly, Blaen y Gwent, with Offending Service and Newport, and others throughout Wales, is that if that is an issue, it is an issue in as much as that those children very often then have to go out of kind of county, and that's not a kind of straightforward process in itself because of the availability. So we're talking very often kind of up north and further afield, really. Certainly within Wales it's very, very difficult, and closer to home it's difficult to identify a placement for children. I know Adam's got his hand up.
Adam, do you want to come in now?
Yeah, just to say, I think, yeah, as Chair said, I think we've been fortunate, and probably just a lot of the good work that we do as well, is lots of children, and what we can offer as an alternative for children being detained in a secure environment. I think the last child was probably last year, and they were on a community order working with us. It was the most robust community order, which is a youth rehabilitation order with intensive surveillance and supervision. So there was a curfew attached to it, electronically monitored curfew, and sort of 20-25 hours of support with ourselves. Unfortunately, the child didn't engage. Obviously, we used lots of techniques to try and get the child to engage. Several attempts back and forth. It's a Crown Court order as well. So several attempts, back and forth court for breach, give the child another opportunity. We tried another opportunity. Unfortunately, he ended up being given a detention and train order, and he was sent to a custodial facility in London. So then what we found is, so the local sort of detention centre that YOI that we use is Park, and Welsh Government have an ambition for all children to be within Wales, which is what should happen. Unfortunately, lots of children have been sort of placed in Park from outside of Wales, primarily London. So there's a scarcity then of placements for Welsh children, and it is on the agenda for sort of Youth Justice Managers Cymru, and it's regularly raised within those forums. But yeah, unfortunately, a child, if they are given a detention train order and they end up in a YOI, then they could be further afield than Park, unfortunately. Slightly different picture if they're younger children, because there's provisions within sort of Neath and Bristol that we tend to use for those children. But again, that's down to resources, and they could well be sort of, we've had children placed before, sort of, I've worked with a child who was in Liverpool, places St Andrews, so yeah, it could be anywhere really.
Anything else, Jason?
Thanks, Chair. I was just going to add, thankfully, the criteria for remands and for children being detained within any sort of detention facility is really strict, and it has got stricter over the years. And if I cast my mind back to when I was in the Youth Offending Service, probably 10, 15, 80 years ago, there would be, on occasions, there would be anything up to, I think, a peak of 12 children in custody. You know, and I'm sure that nobody would advocate for any child to be in a custodial environment unless there were real strict criteria. So I'm really thankful that there's been that fairly dramatic shift in terms of policy and practice to really tighten up on that remand and sentencing process in terms of detention.
Thanks, Jason. As I said, it's still a source of concern, although we've been fortunate that it hasn't happened. It still needs to be kept on our agenda. Okay, thank you.
Just to add, Chair, what I would say there as well is in the case of any remand placement being required, historically we did have foster carers called remand placement or bail support foster carers. They were very rarely used because the numbers were decreasing. But obviously what we would look to do in conjunction, in partnership with the OSS, is if there were any placement required for a child within a foster placement or within a residential establishment, for example, we would look at implementing any alternative measures we could before seeing a child being detained.
Next question, Lucy.
So this is going down to 3.45. Contribution the work has to the council's counter-plan objectives. So this is trying to understand a little bit more about the ETE worker. Am I understanding right that there's just that one person in that role across both counties? So how effective, the question is, how effective is this one person, given that combined Monmouthshire and Torfaen is a big area to cover geographically, and understanding there's 23 referrals to that worker, and so how well is that working?
I was just going to say, I'd go to Tracy. Tracy kind of line manages the ETE worker, so she's best.
Tracy, do you want to come in, please?
Yes, of course. Yeah, so I've got the I-line managers chair said our education, training and employment work within the YOS, and also as a function within the management structure, I've got education which sits within my remit. So so our worker, our ET worker, has got a broad range of responsibilities. So obviously she takes referrals from the children that are open to our YOS staff, whether that be via prevention, out of court disposal, statutory. She would take referrals from case managers where to do either direct interventions with children, or sometimes it's about liaising with, you know, it may not need, they may not always need to see our education worker personally, but she's instrumental in terms of she's got access to the the Education Authority databases for most Monmouthshire and Torfaen, so finding information and liaising with schools. She's got really good relationships with schools, with the PRU in Torfaen, and so it's about that information sharing, checking information in terms of attendance and additional learning needs. So she does a lot of information finding to feed into our case managers, their assessments with children, young people. She does a lot of direct intervention where she would meet with some children directly and do things around sort of educational needs and maybe CSES card sort of training, because she covers both pre-16 and post-16. So she's got links with the training providers, careers. She'll take those direct referral and work with those cases directly, but it's a much broader remit because she'll also sit on all our panels within Youth Offending Service, so our resettlement panel, which looks at children that might be come to the end of their statutory or out of court disposals with us, and there might be any unmet needs at the end and they need a period of voluntary resettlement support, or children coming out of custody and return to the community. So she will sit on our resettlement panel and she'll feed into part of that process. She would attend our risk panel meetings, even if she's not working with the child directly, providing information around education and training. She sits in a number of other meetings, the sort of kit meetings within Torfaen and Monmouthshire, and we have regular catch-ups with Torfaen, sort of Tracy Tucker and key personnel within Torfaen Education. So we have monthly meetings set up now where we touch base. So if they've got any concerns with any children, or is there any additional support we can provide or any information they need from us, and vice versa. So she's got really close links. As a broader remit than that, I've got education within my management structure, and I'm represented in the local management board. I'm the vice chair for the local management board for the PRU in Torfaen. So we're inputting within those environments as well. Obviously, I sit in the local management board as the vice chair, so I'm always a key point of contact from education if they've got any queries with us. So it works really well, that role, and there's a lot of specialism. So what she's very good at, our education worker, is linking in with those community resources, Inspire, colleges, you know, any sort of work experience placements, really, really good links in with the schools, advocating, supporting parents with sometimes our children if they're sort of going through meetings for additional learning needs or exclusions. We have a lot of that, or they've got modified timetable and looking at, you know, sort of the best input for the child. Well, is that being reviewed appropriately? You know, is there anything else that needs to be addressed to meet that child's need? We feed in with our like we've got a speech language communication worker in the OS, and if she's done assessments, I know I sat in a meeting yesterday and that was linked to education with our education worker, seeing how we could best support the child, because we've got a speech language assessment and she wanted to make sure that was shared. This child is between their comprehensive school and some input from the PRU, so making sure that the learning from the speech language report is being shared within the school. They're using that then in terms of the behaviour he's displaying in school on a basic level. Does he understand, you know, instructions? What approaches can they take to give him those instructions? So she does a lot of direct one-to-one referrals, and now those would be the numbers you saw, but also she's much wider, covering across attending relevant meetings, making links with partnership agencies, providing advice and guidance to, you know, other agencies or children's and families directly. So it is quite a broad remit, and it is I feel it's a really, really important post within the Youth Offending Service, because as you can imagine, a lot of the children we work with are probably overrepresented in those children with education, additional learning needs with regards to education, social behaviour, you know, mental health. So it's a really, I think it's a real, because we know desistance from offending, education or training or, you know, constructive activity is really key to that. So it's a really critical role within the OS, I feel, of our specialists.
Would you like to come in on question 15, please?
Yeah, my question is regarding 3.46. Oh,
sorry.
14's
been answered.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, no problem. So this relates to 4.2 in the report. Monmouthshire and Torfaen's proven reoffending rate currently stands at 33.3%. This figure is higher when compared to Gwent, 28.6%, but lower when compared to Wales at 38.9%. Monmouthshire and Torvine's reoffending rate is also higher than that of England at 31.9%. While the turnaround programme shows some success, the reoffending rates in Monmouthshire and Torvine remain higher than in Gwent and England. Why are the outcomes still lagging, and what will the YOS do differently to drive down reoffending and deliver value for the taxpayers?
Voting answer. Chesney?
I'll very much attempt to kind of answer that. Yeah, it is kind of acknowledged that it's slightly higher than the Gwent and that unit of Wales and kind of England. I think what's worthwhile mentioning is kind of the numbers. We're talking about small kind of numbers, and when you've got small numbers, any reoffending within that small number is kind of a much bigger kind of percentage. Yeah. So I think, and if it kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, we're talking about 6 children, 2 of which reoffending, which then gives us that, whereas perhaps we're being compared to other areas, much larger areas, which have a much bigger cohort of children that you're dealing with, and also bigger number of children reoffending. So that's not to say, as I already said, that we don't focus in and look at those children that possibly could argue slip through the net, and what we could then do differently in the future. So it's looking at kind of delivery of service and provision and whether that then needs to change. This information is shared regularly with kind of our partnership agency through our local management board, because we accept and acknowledge and understand that this is not just something that we do, this is something that, you know, we as communities and partnerships need to kind of respond to. So, and kind of the report goes on to kind of how we look to address some of the ASB, and that kind of approach we would take with all kind of issues that we face, and this being similarly. So we would work alongside our partnership agencies then to address some of the issues that we face within those cases. Without looking at those particular cases, it's difficult to give a response as to what we did in those situations, but certainly what I can tell you is that we would have discussed it, we would have acknowledged it, we would have then planned then a response to it going forward, so it strengthened the provision of the youth offending service, both in Monmouthshire and Torvine.
I think as well, I mean, as Chair has pointed out, it's a high percentage but a small number. And I think this is going to sound a bit of a contradiction, where the YOS has sort of come unstuck is it's been a victim of its own success historically, in that it's reduced significantly the numbers of first-time entrants that come into the system. So consequently, those children who find themselves within the system at the statutory level are your more complex, more challenging children. Whereas before, when there was a significant number of first-time entrants, a high level of first-time entrants, some of those children potentially were, for want of a better description, were low-hanging fruit in terms of an ability to prevent or reoffend. So that cohort is a small, condensed cohort. And I'm sure from a YOS perspective, they're channeling resources into the specifics of those children.
Do you want to come back in?
Yeah, just quickly, Chair, if just out of curiosity, with referrals from schools, do you get more from primary or secondary?
Tracy?
Yes, I mean, historically, we've always got more referrals from secondary schools, from our for our preventative services. And I think that is still the case. We're still probably getting more on balance from secondary schools. But I will say over the last year or so, and I think this has been keeping from, well, probably a bit longer than last year or so, but I think this has been keeping with all the messages we hear in the media and things about sort of schools and education and mental health and children and young people and social media and all those things that we hear about. We have had an increasing number of referrals from primary schools within Torvine and Monmouthshire, but you know, definitely within Torvine as well. So we are getting a younger cohort of children being referred in, either coming to our attention through out-of-court disposal. Hopefully, prior to we get to that, we're getting a number of children referred in from primary schools at a much younger age. As you said, 10 is when we would do the full, you know, a proper intervention with them. For those children under 10, we're still invited to attend the multi-agency meetings. We provide advice, guidance, and all of those ancillary things that we talked about, you know, with the HSB advice. So even though we wouldn't open a child that was 8 under harmful sexual behaviour intervention from yours, we would feed in as managers to any risk assessment advice, guidance and all, you know, training, sort of awareness raising. So we are getting a lot of children from the lower age from primary schools, and that's a trend which unfortunately seems to be continuing at the moment.
Adam, do you want to come in? And then Dave, come back in.
Yeah, just to say, in addition to what Tracy's mentioned, I do think that the decision to pull the police officers from schools, the school liaison police officers, I think that's having an impact as well. So whereas, because funnily enough, our new, she's relatively new to post, she was a school liaisons officer in Gwent Caerphilly, and as part of her role, she would do lots and lots of work with big cohorts of children, year groups and assembly groups and things around knife crime, internet use, sexting, lots and lots. She had like a curriculum of work that she would do with those children. Obviously that provision is no longer there then, so I think it's down to the ward managers to cover that post, but obviously they're getting pulled in lots of different directions. They're working different shifts, nights, afternoons, weekends. Obviously schools at 9 to 3:30. So I think that is possibly having an impact on some of those children that might have had that intervention as part of that sort of provision within the school. Possibly they're outsourcing that to us to do that work with those children. I think I think that moving forward, that we probably will see an increase in numbers of referrals from the schools.
Thank you, Adam. Dave, do you want to come back in, please?
Yeah, only really quickly, Chair, if I may. So the answer was very comprehensive from Tracy, which is great. But just for clarification, secondary school referrals are still higher than
yes. Yeah, secondary schools, I would say, on balance, if we look at our prevention cases cohorts currently and the referrals coming, is probably still higher on the secondary school level, but with increasingly more and more coming through from primary. But they're still the biggest driver, I would say, is secondary schools. Would you agree with that, Adam? I think from our current caseload, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think if you just look at the numbers, there's far greater numbers of children between the ages of 10 to 17 within the sort of secondary school provision rather than primary. So you're capturing sort of the year 6s and year 7s possibly within primary if you're looking at the age 10, whereas obviously you're looking up to sort of 5th form and above, really, aren't you? Into well, year, as old school speak, was that year 11? Yeah, so I think it's just greater numbers within the sort of secondary school community.
Just to add to that, Chair, I think in the figures later on, our kind of across the kind of the caseloads, the spike in ages with regards to the cases is, I think, is 13, 14 and 15. So that would indicate that that trend has followed through. So it is more secondary than primary.
Thank you. Line, would you like to come and take your question 16, please?
This refers to paragraph 4.4 and 4.8. Over 6 months, we see a consistent trend in that the majority of prevention referrals are boys. 11 out of 12 children who signed an acceptable behaviour contract in the last financial year, April 2023 to March 2024, are boys, which is a stark contrast to the previous 2 years, where there was a 50-50 gender split. Have we examined the reason behind these trends, and how do we tailor prevention services to address this?
I'm more than happy to kind of start off our response, but I just would some clarity. Address the kind of trends with regards to the 50-50 split, or predominantly boys? So
I think it's both, really.
Okay. So in response, it's something that we kind of monitor very, very closely, any trends that are coming through the kind of data. So, for instance, when it was 50-50, we seen that as a kind of a spike in females coming to our attention. So that was something that we looked at great depth as to why the kind of the reasons behind what fueled that data, and then how we then going to respond to it. So some of the stuff that we kind of did in response to it was, first and foremost, get an understanding, and I don't think we're quite there. It could be that, you know, during that period there was a cohort of females, just kind of wrong place, wrong time sort of thing. But nevertheless, is how we then respond. And our responses of the Youth Offending Service, given that predominantly it's been male, does it take into consideration some of those slight differences that we would need to for females. So those are the things is how we presented the work and what groups we could kind of provide in order to kind of prevent those girls from then coming into the system. So we work alongside the youth offending, the youth offending work alongside the youth service to kind of create some kind of workshops for females predominantly, and ensuring that they had a greater understanding of some of the difficulties and some of the risks that they were placing themselves up. I can't say that was a great success, but what we have done is created open communication with the youth service to kind of put together very quickly some programs of work for females should that kind of trend kind of come into the system in the past. When we look at trying to understand why those females are there, what we've identified that there's hotspots throughout kind of the areas, whether that be in Pontypool, Cwmbran or wherever. Very often alcohol is kind of a great factor. So we then work with kind of safer communities to how we address that. I know within kind of the recent incidents within Pontypool, that was also, again, a strong factor. So the kind of stuff that we're doing is working with police to identify how they were accessing that alcohol, who was purchasing it, and so on and so forth. So it's stopping at that source. And I think, to some degree, there was some success in that. That's not to say that that's not going to kind of pop up elsewhere back in Cwmbran. So it's something, it's always a moving programme, a moving target, but it's something that we are constantly looking to address. So in response, it is something that we are continually kind of monitoring, evaluating. I wouldn't say that we get it right all the time, but we certainly we're looking to address it. The fact that it's come to our attention through some of the analysis that we've done is that historically lots of these females that are becoming involved in the criminal justice system would have perhaps taken a different route via the health service because their kind of primary issues around their emotional well-being. But because of the way that the health service is now structured, they're perhaps not getting that service. So they're not going via that, and then they find themselves kind of embroiled in the criminal justice service. So it's working alongside our partners and doing a piece of work specifically around that now to how we address that, how we potentially fast-track some of these young females, and that's not just young females, but that's also males, in getting the support that they require before they then kind of find themselves in the community in criminal activity.
Chesney, the clerk to our meeting. Welcome, Richard. Not a problem. And we take on the next question, question 17 from Councillor Colette Thomas, please.
Chair, my question relates to point 4.14. 4.14 shows 6 looked after children under restorative approaches. In point 7, it sets out the removal of supporting posts. So what impact will this cut have on preventative services for our looked after children, please?
Sorry, Claire, I didn't quite catch all that. Could you repeat it? I'm so sorry.
In point 7, it sets out the removal of a supporting post. So what impact will this cut have on the preventative services for our looked after children?
Thanks for that. Yes, you're correct. It was a post that we removed, but what we did in kind of the redesign of the service was to kind of ensure that those responsibilities were absorbed by other members of the service. So during our redesign, we identified not just one alternative member of staff to take on those responsibilities, but a number of. So this tool will kind of coordinate that, but they'll draw in other members of staff when doing kind of presentations to kind of residential units or kind of to foster carers. So although we've removed that, I think that's, is that what you're referring to? That
Just need to be assured that they are having the same support that they were receiving before.
Yes. So sorry. So yeah. So that responsibilities and role has been absorbed by other members of staff who are now kind of ensuring that they are kind of taking place. So they will do the presentations and so on and so forth. So we are confident as a service that, you know, we are not missing and those children are still receiving the service.
Thanks, Chesney. And then bring in Tracy and then Jason wants to come in, please.
Yeah, it was just to Clyde. So that was a sort of designated post previously, and as with having to, you know, consider you know, staffing levels and funding and things, what we did is we picked two of our dedicated members of staff, so one of our social workers and one of our support workers, both of whom were really good links, because one had been a foster carer in a previous life, another one worked with parents and foster carers previously. So we sort of picked within our existing staff those with the skill set where they've had lots of sort of liaison with residential placements. With, I mean, all of our staff have to a degree, but we sort of picked ones we thought would have a really good skill set and level of understanding. They would be our main links with the, you know, reducing offending and children looked after, or PCLA. But also we've got a victim worker within the YOS specialist, and he also provides input into that, because what they do is they provide restorative justice training, which is a key part of that role. They provide restorative justice training to foster carers, to residential placements, so that some of the approaches that they use can be utilised within the placement to reduce placement breakdown, to reduce children coming into the criminal justice system through, you know, incidents that happen within the residential placements or within the foster care placement. We also are part of a working party for PCLA approach across Gwent, and we sort of chair those meetings, and we look at the work across the Gwent region. Whilst we all have our individual responsibilities within that, it's a Gwent-wide approach, advocated through Welsh Assembly now as well, sort of Wales-wide approach. So we've made sure that that function, even though we've had to consider capacity and where we could accommodate that work, I think we've done that successfully. It's still, you know, really on the agenda. And when we get prevention referrals coming through, sometimes even if they don't refer specifically for that project, for the reducing, you know, the PCLA, the reducing offending and children looked after, or restorative justice approaches, we will sort of signpost that, and we think actually this is a prevention referral, but actually this would they still get the same prevention service, but they would sit better within this specialism of the service because of their, you know, the role in the residential placement or the foster kids or maintaining that placement. So I think that we're still able to meet those demands and meet that role, which is a real critical function, because we do know that children in the, you know, who have been looked after, and again, it goes back to sort of difficult traumatic life events, are overrepresented in the youth offending statistics. So we are making sure that we meet that criteria and that responsibility, even without the dedicated worker in post that we had previously.
Thanks, Tracy. Adam?
Yeah, just to say that in addition, I think it is a really well-established programme within Gwent. I think we were ahead of the curve in terms of Wales in working with those children that are care experience and trying to divert them from the criminal justice system. But what we are also able to do is for those children that, for example, commit an offence, and we've done this several times in the past, within the care home environment. Say, for example, the care home, because of the nature of care homes, not so much now, but previously, you get lots of different ones popping up in different areas, and they might not be aware of our sort of protocol in terms of working with looked after children. So we've asked in those cases where a complaint has been made, we've had a referral through for that child for an out-of-court disposal. We've actually gone back to the OIC and asked them to make contact with the victim to see if they would reconsider if the child agreed to work with us as part of sort of our RACLA process. They would receive the same intervention that they would if they'd had a out-of-court disposal. Would they be willing to sort of withdraw the complaint and allow us to work with them on a sort of almost like a preventative basis? And that has been quite successful in the past. So that's another arm and another benefit really of this provision that we offer to those care experienced children within Torfaen and in Monmouthshire.
Thanks, Adam. Okay.
I think it's been covered now, Councillor.
Committee, Councillor Thomas has to leave this meeting at 11:30. So you're happy if we bring his two questions now? Are you happy? Okay. Councillor Thomas.
Thanks, Chair, and I appreciate that. Apologies for having to leave early, but I think what I'll do, if it's okay with you, Chair, I'll just ask the two questions in one, if that's all right. That's okay? Okay, great. Okay, so the first question relates to 6.2 of the report, the uncertainty of external grants. The report highlights ongoing funding uncertainties for the Youth Offending Service, but references to external grants seem to dominate planning. How can we establish a stable, long-term funding strategy for such a critical service to offer provision in a way that is less dependent on grant funding? I'm doing it again like full council. The second question I've got is related to 7.1 of the report. Monmouthshire and Torfaen Yoss currently has a vacant social worker post, which within this proposal will be frozen until the 31st of March 2025. What impact will the decision to leave this post vacant have, especially in ensuring vulnerable children receive the expert care they deserve? And just as a supplementary then, what is the forecast for filling this vacancy after 2025 with financially and in terms of sourcing appropriately qualified social workers?
Right. Chelsea?
More than happy to kind of have an attempt at those three questions. Okay, so with regards to the grant funding, as I've highlighted, it's been a historical issue, certainly long before I kind of joined the service, is that some of the funding is always late in being established. So I think it's only recently we've been awarded the amount from the YJB, which is a substantial amount of money. I think the difficulty, and what I will tell members of the panel is that that's something that's constantly on the agenda for all services throughout Wales, is that we are constantly approaching the YJB and asking them about this. The difficulty is it's not them, it's the central government, and that hinges on a number of things that are going on for central government. I think the recent one was obviously the change in government, and everything was put on hold as a result of that, and then the finances were only released thereafter. So it's constantly, we're on the back foot. So with regards to planning the service, it's always very difficult because it's a large amount of money for us, and what we don't know is that if it's going to be reduced. I wouldn't say it's going to be pulled, but certainly reduced, and how we then fulfil our obligations if there's going to be a reduction in those kind of finances. So that's something that we are constantly kind of approaching the YGB about, who are then kind of lobbying kind of central government, but there doesn't seem to be any change in that picture. With regards to other partnership agencies, we are currently discussing that at the local management board, and what we are looking to do is get a 3-year plan agreed, so partners will agree to contribute a proportion, and that proportion will kind of be the same for the next 3 years, so a percentage of it. So hopefully if that gets through kind of the board, then obviously that will kind of benefit us in regards to planning. But I'm also conscious that is obviously the financial landscape at this moment in time means that, you know, partnership agencies are very reluctant to kind of make a commitment because they don't know what their funding is going to look like. What has been suggested is potentially a cut, or it's going to be frozen, and it's how we then as a service manage with that, because although they want to freeze this uplift then in kind of NI and kind of wages, which would then need to be factored in. What I would tell kind of members is that that's never been factored into the kind of contribution, so we're always working at a deficit, if you like. We've been able to manage that deficit up until now because there's been some flex in the kind of budget, but because we've streamlined the service and streamlined the budgets over the years, we are now at a place where the budget that we get in is just covering the cost of the service. So any uplift, i.e. kind of uplift in wages, and as I mentioned, is not covered. So, and if it's not agreed, then obviously we'll have to continue to cut the service until there's nothing left of it, I suppose. So that's my concern, and that's something that is going to have to be worked out through kind of local management board. Hopefully it will, with a positive outcome, but that discussion is yet to happen. So that's the kind of budget element of it. With regards to the post kind of frozen, that was a mandate that was put forward by myself in order to make savings for the service. We were fortunate in that it was a vacant post at the time, so what was agreed and what was kind of agreed by the local management board is that yes, we would freeze it, would then give us, give us the saving required in order to kind of make the savings for our partnership agencies. It was frozen on the basis is that what we were seeing at that moment in time was, and we continue to see, I might add, is a kind of an increase in kind of service demand, albeit small, but nevertheless kind of increase. What we are kind of anticipating, and that's going to increase further, but nobody can give any guarantees on that. So it was always good to have that in the background. So should the financial kind of climate change, and I say that with a smile on my face because of what we all know, is that possibly partnership agencies would be able to kind of contribute a little more or maintain their contribution, and we could then almost bring that kind of social worker back into play. What we've done to kind of mitigate against some of that pressures is that we've been transparent as a management board within the service and ensuring that all the staff were fully aware of some of the pressures that we were under, and what we would be asking of them is to kind of, you know, absorb some of that added pressure, which I have to say they've been fantastic in doing so. But that kind of good work can only go so far. So the ideal kind of picture and position to be in was that we could bring it back into play, but I'm conscious that during these very, very difficult times, that may not be possible, and kind of, you know, that may never be able, because I'm conscious that going into the next financial year, we could possibly have to look for further savings, and obviously that's something that we'd have to then consider as a service, but also as a management board, as to whether we just say, well, okay, that can no longer be kind of part of the kind of structure. So I hope that answered that question. I think, and the final element, you'll have to remind me, sorry. Yeah. Okay.
Jason, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to add, Chair, I chair the local management board, the Chair's referenced there, and that has been a key focus for us in more recent meetings around the financial arrangements for the YOS and around the sustainability there. The grants are always an issue. Grants are an issue for every organisation, aren't they, because of the time frames and the time scales of grants and the uncertainty of the Youth Justice Board grant that Chair's has referenced. I think it's about £280,000 or thereabouts per annum. During my time in the YOS, it's always been very late in the day in notification of that grant, but I think we'd always managed to sort of preempt what was coming in that sense. I think the advantage, and this is something we discussed within the management board, and I guess hence some of the performance information that's been presented today, is the nature of the work of the YOS has changed dramatically, as I referenced earlier. So we've gone from, you know, a significant amount of children being in secure establishments, a significant amount of children being on statutory orders and interventions, to a greater shift into that prevention world. And I think what the YOS has been good at doing, and I think will continue to be good at doing, is flexing its resource based upon where that shift and the shift in sands are. So moving resource from the need for statutory interventions into that preventative work. And I think that's something that the YOS is quite good, and probably will continue to be quite good at doing as well.
Jason.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chair. The answers were very comprehensive and very helpful, so yeah, that should help the committee, I think.
Questions 20 and 21 have already been asked and answered. So can I go back to question 19 from Councillor Colette Thomas and ask her if she'll do that question and take on question 22 as well, please?
I think you have answered some of my question, really. It's just saying about the antisocial behaviour that we had during the summer in Pontypool and Cumberland Town Centres. I just wondered, do we know what caused this significant increase? And was substance misuse part of the antisocial behaviour? And what services do we engage with to prevent that, please?
Sorry, yeah. So I know that both Adam and Tracy are desperate to kind of answer. But yeah, so I'll hand over to Adam.
Tracy, and then Adam, please.
Yeah, so we've got a bit of an idea. I think it was a combination of factors, the antisocial behaviour that sort of culminated within the Torfaen Pontypool area, specifically back in the summer. I think it was a little bit, definitely alcohol, substance misuse was part of that, and alcohol use. There's been a lot of children and young people sort of stealing alcohol from the shops in Pontypool, Cwmbran, Torfaen, but also in Monmouthshire. It's something we're also seeing in Monmouthshire, particularly around Abergavenny, but stealing alcohol, thefts from the shop, girls going in stealing the alcohol, coming out sharing it with a wider group, which includes a big group of boys as well. So there's something about, definitely there was substance misuse involved and alcohol use involved in that. Something about the particular cohort and mix of those children and young people. Sometimes you get like a particular group of young people that associate with each other. are unknown to each other, and then you can get a real spike in a particular area. So we knew some of those children who were involved in that antisocial behaviour were known to us under other antisocial behaviour input, but also preventative input, or there's also some that have been within the criminal justice system. So there was a bit of a link with those particular group of peers that were sort of driving and fueling that quite heavily, but also bringing in a lot of other children which weren't known to any services. So those are some of the factors that we've sort of identified, and we've done that in partnership with our community safety partnership, with other sort of multi-agency across, you know, children's services. We've had sort of section 115 meetings and lots of multi-agency meetings to have a look what was, you know, with our education partners, with health partners, what was driving that in particular. So I think it was a bit of a perfect storm of a particular mix of children, opportunities in which they were sort of stealing alcohol, drugs, and a lot of that being involved, and those sort of factors. I know that it's improved since then, and the events have moved on somewhat. There was lots of input in terms of community safety. We've inputted in that with individuals and with wider partnership meetings. Our victim workers also had some involvement in respect to some of the community resources within Torvine. But I'd say it's hard to sometimes pinpoint these things, but it seems to be a bit of a combination of those two factors that was dry. And there were some older children, I would say some adults, young adults, albeit, also involved within that. But certainly the children that we knew within the cohort, it was a particular mix of some children with very, very complex needs and lots of other children being brought in on the periphery. Is there anything that I haven't captured within that ad?
No, I think it's I think it was just a combination of factors which you've outlined, Trace. But in terms of the substance misuse support that we can offer, if children are working with us, we've got a seconded substance misuse worker from Engage, which is the substance misuse provider for Gwent. And as part of that process, then she can, again, it's with the consent of the child, complete an assessment and a programme of work with that child then to help reduce their substance misuse, whether it's alcohol use or various sort of like cannabis or cocaine or, you know, lots of other different substances. But also there's an additional referral pathway into health. So if those children's substance misuse is such that they require sort of more specialist intervention, there's a monthly joint assessment meeting where our drugs worker Joe, known by the children as Druggy Joe, so if anyone here is a Druggy Joe, she's actually a professional in our service. She can take that case to that joint assessment sort of meeting just to see if they fit a threshold, and they can be allocated to a specialist nurse within CAMS. So yeah, there's quite a robust provision in place within the YOS, and I think what we are fortunate in, and this is one of the functions of the specialist within our service, the referral mechanism is really quickly. So there isn't a lag, there's no delay, so a referral can be made, and then, you know, workload permitting, Joe can get out and see that child sort of the following day if necessary, or the same day sometimes if it's crucial. But yeah, there is that robust support for that child. But also there's, because she's seconded from Engage, she attends their sort of weekly meetings, and she's also able to, they've got like constructive activities workers and painting workers within within Engage, so she can refer into those services then as well. And for children then that are leaving our service, she can help with that transition work. So if our work is completed but there's ongoing substance misuse support that's necessary, Joe is really crucial within those transition ends, because very often a child will build that trusty relationship with someone, and they're reluctant to build another relationship and tell the same story again to another professional. So Joe's role within that, sort of to make that smooth transition so that child continues receiving that support and engaging with that support, is really, really important.
Thanks, Adam. Colette, do you want to go?
Helpful, thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Right. Move on to question 22. Caroline, do you want to take?
The locality of referrals data seems pretty static by Monmouthshire, but increasing for Torvine. Do different approaches need to be taken in Torvine to address this?
Any takers?
Sorry, could you just repeat that again? Sorry.
Yeah. The locality of referrals data seems pretty static for Monmouthshire, but increasing for Torfaen. Do different approaches need to be taken in Torfaen to address this?
This is the one with the graph, Councillor.
Yeah.
Yes? You've got the wrong number in there.
So my initial response would be that no, it doesn't need to be kind of altered. I think what we have found out is that the communication and processes that are embedded and in place within Torfaen is where we would want them to be. So that kind of throughput of cases we are getting, and in fact we would want to improve them to ensure that, you know, we kind of get any of those cases preventative at the most earliest opportunity. What we would say is that the processes and kind of communication within Monmouthshire is currently being kind of looked at and considered, and what we're looking to do is embed similar systems that are in place within Torfaen within Monmouthshire. So we are certainly happy as we possibly could be with Torfaen. We wouldn't want them to be that number, but you know, we think we get a true figure through, whereas we don't believe that the figure coming through in Monmouthshire is an accurate one, because we are not being provided with those referrals data.
Thank you.
So, Colin Thomas, your next question, question 23, please.
My question refers to 5.2. Do we take a regional approach to any of our services to share best practice or cross-county interventions? And how do we work with our youth service in offering preventative provision?
Sorry to have to do that again, but my hearing is not the best, obviously, in this room.
Do we take a regional approach to any of our services to share best practice or cross-county interventions? And how do we work with our youth service in offering preventative provision?
First and foremost, yes, there is cross-fertilisation. We work across kind of the authority and we look for best practice. We are kind of encouraged to share that best practice, and should a member of staff, whether it's part of management or staff in, see something, we would ask that they bring that back and see what we as a service could learn from, first and foremost. So that's a real emphasis within the service. We're looking to continually grow and improve. With regards to the work that we do with youth service, I'm conscious that something historically that we've done extremely well, and that was probably pre-pandemic. I think since the kind of pandemic, there's been a bit of a lag in getting those services back up and running, and that's been a number of factors have played into that with regards to the availability of accommodation and so on and so forth. So we recognise that it was a good practice to work in collaboration with them, and it's something that we're looking to kind of go forward with. So I've mentioned earlier on the work that we were looking to do in response to some of the issues around kind of females and that spike, and working in collaboration with kind of youth service in order to deliver that. There were some problems that we hit with regards to getting the right cohort of females together, because that can be problematic in itself, but certainly, you know, it's something that we would look to do with kind of the youth service. So it's something that we are looking for opportunities to do so, and it's constantly on the agenda for us.
Tracy, then Adam, and I think Jason might want to come in. So Tracy first, please.
Thank you. Yeah, so in terms of a Gwent regional approach, we have lots of collaboration with our neighbours in Caerphilly, Blaen and Gwent, and in Newport, and we do take quite a regional approach. Court-wise, obviously we have the same youth court, and we have regional meetings with our youth court, with our court advisors, court user service meetings, which we do as a Gwent cohort. With the project that we talked about earlier, that helps to reduce offending and restorative approaches for children looked after. That's a regional approach. Whilst we sort of have our own individual ways that we deliver that, we meet as a region and we have a working plan which is across the region. So we share good practice within that, with, you know, what's happening in the Caerphilly, Blaen and Gwent area, Newport area and our area, and we share that and we support them. We've helped to train them up in restorative justice training, where they were reducing capacity, they had limited capacity in Newport and new workers, so we had to train them and induct them, and so we do have a really good approach there. Also, as team managers, we meet every 2 months. to share good practice with our counterparts within the management structures in the other two Gwent diocese. So we have regular meetings. We look at Gwent approaches. We look at work outside of that, sort of themes, issues, training that they found useful that we might find useful, sort of sharing good practice, sharing problem solving sort of approaches. So we have really close, and in between the sort of structured meetings, we have regular communication with our counterparts in the other dioceses. And I know the service managers at chairs level also, they meet regularly across Gwent. So with regards to the youth service, as Chair said, if there's a need where we had an overrepresentation of girls within our cohort at one time, so we linked in with our youth service counterparts to see could we do something jointly. We've had lots of links in, and we're sort of looking to get those up and running again, but we've fed into things like where they've had groups running in like Ashley House, or, you know, certain groups or tips. If we can share resources there, and if we can sort of do some joint work, we do that as well. So I know youth services have been reduced in terms of financially over the years, but we, you know, so I think probably in the past there was a lot more of that, but it is still going on, and we still make links where we need to. We've got good contacts, and we do share resources and share their sort of, you know, expertise for particular projects or with our particular children wherever we can.
Thanks.
Sorry, my hearing cut out. My speakers wouldn't work then. Yeah, just in addition to what Tracy's mentioned, really, and in terms of that best practice, that each youth offending service in Gwent has a dedicated community nurse specialist within the service from Aneurin Bevan, and each of those professionals have a specialism. So Mike Jones is our clinical nurse specialist, so he's trained in PBS delivery. So it's basically those it's a behaviour plan for children with sort of additional needs. So lots of children that we work with, I hate the term IQ, but that's used within the PBS. So children with an IQ that below 70, he helps construct and develop specific plans for education provisions, or even for parents how to manage those behaviours. So he will do that work across Gwent, and then some of the other staff within Gwent have their own specialisms that we can also tap into if Mike isn't trained in those. And in addition, then, in terms of that sort of cross-pollination of good work, there's been quite a substantial restructure within Monmouthshire Community Safety Partnership and how they tackle and manage and sort of antisocial behaviour. So I'm part of I was part of a working group from its initial stages, but I felt that it was really quite a robust sort of programme in Torvine that's been sort of there for a long time, and they do it really well. So I put the Ian who's leading on it in Monmouthshire in contact with colleagues within Torvine now, and they've adopted a similar model. So I think that's important as well, is to share good practice, not just within our service, but other services we're aware of. So in terms of the youth service, I think, you know, we're part of lots of different discussion groups. I know there's a hub that we're part of that meet on a 3-weekly basis to discuss those children that are sort of engaging in antisocial behaviour. I know the youth service are part of that, same within Monmouthshire. So I think it's just pooling resources sometimes, isn't it, when, you know, everything is, you know, resources are finite, aren't they? And I know that the youth service has been sort of drastically cut in numbers and things, so I think that's probably had an impact also. But yeah, it's definitely a work in process, and we've also started recently to re-engage with our colleagues in CCYP about sort of utilising their space and doing some joint work with them as well. So I think that's something moving forward that's going to be some positive outcomes for some of our children.
Thanks, Adam. Colette, do you want to come in? Anything else? Jason, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just going to add, of course, regionally, we sit across the ABUHB footprint, or the OS sits within that, and within the police footprint, and nationally across the probation footprint as well. So there's a lot of collaborative work that takes place with those organisations, and a lot of the preventative activity that this instrumental in police activation is mirrored across the region. There's also a Youth Justice Advisory Panel that meets regularly, which is a national panel, which looks at good practice and sharing good practice, and chairs attends the Yacht Managers Cymru, which is, again, a Wales-wide yacht managers panel or group that looks at good practice as well. In terms of the last question, in relation to the youth service, and Chairs has, I guess, highlighted some deficits there in terms of post-pandemic developments. One of the things I'm quite keen to look at is that youth service provision and how it, I guess in terms of the work the YOS do and the work the youth service does, there isn't duplication there, and it's quite targeted from both respects. So there's an officer in education, because obviously that sits in within my line of sight now at the moment as well. So I've got an officer in education look at some of the activities within the youth service as well, so we can start to map out where that service can be more effective and can link in with some of the aspects of the youth offending service as well.
That's good, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay. You're pleased to know we come to the last two questions now, and they both financial impacts. It's question 25. With funding from external agencies, are we required to, and if so, how do we demonstrate value for money? So do you want me to ask my next question? We can answer them both together?
Yes, okay.
Is that okay? The last question is, additional information provided to the committee indicates a budget shortfall of 179,000, with a 75,000 pressure falling on Torfaen Council. This is a significant amount of money, and how are we looking to address this shortfall?
Okay, I'll answer some of the points, and then perhaps Chairs and Tracy and Adam will want to answer some of the others. In terms of value for money, a lot of the information that's been presented today in terms of the performance management is presented to the local management board, so we scrutinise the activity there to determine the outcomes and determine, you know, that we're seeing changes or the direction of travel that we would anticipate. One of the things I alluded to earlier was a significant reduction of first-time entrants. That's been really effective, you know, and, you know, we would want for nothing more than there to be less and less people involved or less and less children involved in the youth justice system. So I think there's a good mechanism there through the management board around determining value for money against outcomes. Of course, as we've already alluded to, there's shrinking budgets. So that value for money, I guess, needs to become even more valuable as time goes on. And again, I mentioned earlier within the local management board, we sort of tasking the service with determining the future shape of service direction and delivery based upon those shrinking resources. In terms of the budget shortfall, at the moment as it stands, if I'm correct, there's a projected underspend because of some of the contingencies and I guess some of the mitigations that the service has already put into place for 24-25 hours, or 24-25. So there's an underspend there, as I understand it. I think Chairs has already touched upon where some of the posts have been held vacant. So what we need to determine going forward from the management board perspective and the management board point of view and our partnership point of view is, do we have the right service that's fit for that cohort of individuals we're working with at the moment? I hope I haven't set you up there, Chairs, to answer anything.
I think that probably covers most of what you asked. So, yeah, I think the next step for us as a management team and a kind of management board is to kind of look at kind of the service, whether it's meeting its demands, which I would argue it is, and whether we feel it's robust enough to meet what we believe is going to be an increased demand on that service. So that's very, very difficult when you then kind of add in some of the kind of financial constraints that are potentially going to be put upon us. So we as a service will do everything that we possibly can to kind of continue to kind of deliver what I believe is a very high quality service. But my concern would be is that will be impacted significantly should there be further cuts or kind of, should there be further cuts. So that's the concern. But nevertheless, we would look at what we've got to kind of work with when that time comes.
Yeah, I think Adam wants to come in. Adam?
Yes, thanks. Yeah, just to sort of reiterate what Chairs has said in terms of that sort of how we measure value for the community of Torfaen, really. And I think it's I think there's data that would support it. Like Jason has also referenced sort of the foreign, like first amendments, but I think it's a lot of softer data that we produce as well, because I think as a service, we're probably more scrutinised than lots of other services within like children's services or education, because we, on a quarterly basis, we have to send key performance indicators to the Youth Justice Board for some of our grant funding. There's quarterly returns or 6 monthly returns that we provide for those. Obviously, we've had a recent HMIP inspection back in, I'd say recent, felt recent, it's 2 years ago. Still getting over the trauma. No, I'm joking. It was good. We had a good service. Sort of, that was the rating from the inspection. But I think it's things like, you know, a child reducing his substance misuse. That's a benefit to the community. A child whose relationship is better with his parents, engaging in education and employment. There's lots of other measures that we use that aren't sort of statistical in terms of like first amendments. A lot of softer evidence that we can pull and collate in terms of our returns and some of the analysis that we do as a service. So it's not just about like the reoffending. There's lots of other measures I think that we can use to sort of promote and justify really that how we're spending the money, if that makes sense.
Yes, it certainly does. Thanks, Adam. Tracy, do you want to come in, please?
Yeah, I think it, you know, obviously to repeat what, you know, Chairs and Adam and Jason have already highlighted, it is times of increasingly difficult financial times for all local authorities and agencies, isn't it? And obviously in the YOS we take our financial stewardship seriously. We've tried as much as we possibly can to make cuts where we can, put posts on hold, savings in terms of, you know, where we've tried to look at providing those services, but within our existing structures, such as within certain things, elements in the turnaround provision, certain elements with the children, reducing children looked after, sort of our accommodation, we've want to move to cost neutral accommodation. So we've moved our office space now, that was in September. So we're trying really hard to make, you know, because we understand that, you know, the difficult times, and we're all sort of, we all come into that, doesn't it? It affects all of us. So we're trying to make those cuts as much as we possibly can. It will be increasingly difficult, as you said, with, you know, sort of, we do have, with all those methods in place and certain things like a staff member being on maternity and things like that, we do have an amount of underspend for that, you know, to cover this financial year, which will obviously help in that respect. In that future, you know, projecting things financially, it will be increasingly difficult, you know, in terms of keeping on salami slicing the service without that impacting on the good, you know, our service delivery and the support that we provide, and that impact on Torfaen community and Monmouthshire community. I know within the very recent published inspection within Ceredigion, I think that was published, and I think they had an inadequate rating, but within that it was talking about funding within youth offending services generally and the importance of maintaining funding levels, you know, because I think that service in particular had been particularly hit with funding constraints. So it is something, because we want to carry on doing the good work that we do, being responsible financially as much as we possibly can in terms of sort of realigning things within our service and providing value for money for Torfaen. But yeah, it's not without its challenges in terms of reduction in capacity and all those things when you're still trying to provide as much of a service as you can, and across the broad area of the YOS interventions that we've always found, you know, has been successful in terms of positive impacts for the community, positive impacts for children and young people, and the benefit to the wider statutory services, children's services, health, our partner agencies are also, when we do that sort of joined up approach, and the work that YOS provides is also beneficial in terms of some of the outcomes for those agencies as well, and we receive positive feedback from our partnership agencies.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Adam, Tracy, and our officers. That comes to the end of our questioning. But before we start to think of our recommendations, I'm going to invite Councillor Peter Jones and then Councillor Richard Clark to say if they have any information or statements they would like to pass on to us, please.
Can I come in first, Chair?
Peter Clark.
Yeah, I'd like to thank officers for the impressive service that they provide. I'm really pleased with the emphasis on prevention, and I noted Adam said earlier in the meeting that we follow a national blueprint. I led on youth justice for the Welsh Government for 10 years, and I'm really pleased this continues. The other thing I noted was the discussions around antisocial behaviour. Now, within my portfolio sits community safety, and I got the cabinet portfolios changed last year to ensure that youth offending sits alongside this. From my perspective, this helps with linkages. So I think the service that we get for Torfaen and Monmouthshire is excellent, and I'd just like to say thank you to the officers again. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Councillor Clark, would you like to come in, please?
Again, apologies for being late. It was I had another activity before coming here. It's nothing to do with my lack of respect for the committee, honestly. In terms of what Peter just said, there obviously is not confusion, but it's one of those areas, grey areas, because I'm children and families as well as education, where some confusion could occur. Peter is doing, I'm not just saying this because he's online, Peter's doing an excellent job, and more power to his elbow, and it is appropriate because you have the linkages in the wider stuff. I have listened with interest today with the reports, none of them really surprising, because though I can't make every YOS meeting, I've certainly read the papers and there were no surprises for me today, which is always reassuring. It's a bit off if I'm suddenly surprised or back-footed by something. Something I could have jumped in sooner on the prevention work. I know the youth service, thanks to Pontypool Council in the Pontypool area, are upping the provision they provide in Pontypool. So hopefully in the future we'll see the benefits of that with the incidents in Pontypool Town and the diversion that will provide. And having spoken to the youth service manager in my regular briefing last week, that is something he wants to extend into the Cumbran area and sort of maybe highlight the benefit of Pontypool Council to councils in Cumbran, both Cumbran and Crossgalliog and Avon, to tackle some of the issues there. So, very interesting debate. I'm sad I missed the beginning of it.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. I'm sure everyone will appreciate what you're doing in Pontypool, so well done. Anything further from you? Okay.
Nothing from us, thank you, Chair.
No problem. Well, thank you very much for attending, answering all our questions really comprehensively. I think you need to go and have a cup of coffee now while we make some recommendations and take considerations. Thank you both. Thank you online and for Councillor Jones for joining us. Thank you ever so much. Bye.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Yes, it is. As long as thanks for the extensive questioning. I know Colette needs to go very shortly as well. So can we move on and remind ourselves that the meeting is still in proceedings and still being webcast? Can we now refer to the scrutiny activity and invite recommendation from you? So I hand you over to Bex, who will formulate our questions, please.
Thank you, Chair. So just quickly to remind members that your scrutiny activity in addressing your key question is to determine whether you are satisfied that the Council's youth offending service is having sufficient impact in ensuring that preventative activities are targeting ASB hotspot areas, to assess whether the actions activities proposed to develop services provision further will be effective, and then to make your recommendations to the executive member. So can I hand over to the committee to make your recommendations, please?
I think we're satisfied, but as always, I think this. Listening to the reports, I still think there's room for improvement. Once numbers are increasing in our areas, I think we need to be watchful and mindful of it. Obviously, this can be affected by any possible budget cuts, so that is a great concern. So Does anyone want to come in first for the recommendations? I've got a few, but I'll hand it over to Colette, Lucy and Caroline first before I go, because I don't want to hog the boat.
I think they are providing a very good service, actually, and I think it's really good that we've got the link between, we've got the executive member for corporate services, which deals, you know, can look at the OS and community safety. So I think it's a really good link for us. So, and I think they're doing a really good job.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. All right, anybody else? Yeah, I think so. I mean, I come up listening to a recommendation when they said that, I think it was for question 22 or 23, when we said we'd lost an officer with COVID. I think, you know, whether we need to speak to Councillor Peter Jones, to, you know, for his committee or the budget, to see if we can reinstate that officer post. And also the other one about the police liaisons, the officers used to go into school, which is sadly missed. So I don't know if we need to speak to the relevant officers or go to the Police and Crime Commission to see it, because I think having a loss of police officers in schools, which is vital service, so...
Sorry, just to come in on that, I thought they said there was police liaisons and that's why there had been an increase in...
I thought you said that they hadn't had the police liaison officer.
A couple of I think they can be recommendations. So the first one, I noticed obviously that the whole situation with extra budget burdens because of the national insurance contribution, I think we would want to monitor that and see if that's going to how that's going to affect staffing provision. The other recommendation, possibly maybe through the executive, is to see if we can put pressure to continue the funding of the what was it called again? Turnaround project, because, you know, given the fact that prevention is key, and given the fact that whenever budgets get cut, prevention gets cut, and that will automatically have a knock-on effect. So I think we could ask if the executive could support and maybe, you know, put pressure on the Welsh Government to continue that funding.
Put pressure onto Welsh Government when their budget comes out that we need the money to continue these vital services, just as I said, for prevention, because we don't need more children getting into trouble, and it's absolutely necessary. And if the preventative measures need funding, we need to ensure the Welsh Government, through our local, our leader, ensures that we get that funding to continue our vital services. Caroline.
I thought exactly the same as Lucy, to be honest with you, because if they're cutting and cutting and cutting, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
The points were made about the turnaround projects here.
Bex, have you picked up on anything?
Only one, Chair, in addition to your financial consideration and recommendation there. I didn't know whether you wanted to put something in with regards to the point that Councillor Thomas raised about the youth service. And he said they are looking to that because he feels there is some duplication in working at the moment. So whether that is a priority for them in the coming months.
I think that would...
The other one, I don't know whether we can make it into a recommendation, but I was conscious when they were saying that the increase, basically the lack of provision with the health service, and they were also talking about Gwent-wide, that there's a community nurse specialist. I don't know if we can make some kind of recommendation about how we can improve the health provision within the youth service. I don't know. Is that too big and vague? But it does seem to have an impact, because he was specifically saying, wasn't he, that they found that the increase in the girls was related to alcohol use, which in turn was related to the lack of provision for mental health support. So I don't know if you can work that into or maybe just a, I don't know, but it just, for me, that was a concern. They've only had one, even last year. But one is too many. Yeah, exactly. You can't tell.
I think Jason did come in and add that we do try and work with our foster care. We have
We will,
specialists.
yes, but I think it's something that perhaps before we finish the meeting, do you want to run through things with us now, please?
Thank you, Chair. So the next report is looking at the item for the next scheduled meeting, which is the 29th of January 2025. So as you will see from the appendix, there was your basket of items. Then there is the executive forward plan, which just only contains one, which is the social care fees and charges report, which is not something that necessarily come through scrutiny. There have been no audit committee referrals in this time period. So the item that you selected at Visioning was for the meeting to be a joint meeting with the Education Committee looking at early years provision. So are members still satisfied that that is the item that you're considering?
Yeah.
Thank you. So the key question on that will be looking at how effective our early years provision is in helping break the cycle of disadvantage to give our children a good start in life, leading to better developmental outcomes and readiness to learn.
Brilliant. We look forward to that. I'm sure we've all got lots of issues on that. I'm sure Colette has as well. Do we have to go through anything else? No? Have we listed everything? Okay. Well, thank you all for coming to meet this morning. Fantastic questions. I'm sure officers have gone home with a mindful of what we've raised. All I need to say is, have a lovely Christmas.